For 25 years. Every nail I hammered into this house was an act of love for my wife. Eleanor, my daughter, Amelia, saw it differently. To her and her husband, it wasn't a home. It was a $970,000 asset, and I was the only obstacle standing in their way. If you believe that respect for elders is non-negotiable, make sure you subscribe and follow my story. The smell of lemon oil and old wood always reminded me of Saturdays with Eleanor. It was a scent of peace, of a job well done. I ran a soft cloth over the silver frame on the mantelpiece, polishing away a week's worth of dust from our wedding photo. 40 years, and her smile still felt like the warmest place on earth. My thumb traced the curve of her cheek on the glass. The house was quiet, as it usually was these days. It was a deep, settled quiet. The kind that lets you hear the old timbers creak as they settle. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The distant whisper of traffic 2 blocks over. Every inch of this house held a sound. A scent. A memory. I could feel the slight dip in the pine floorboards near the armchair. A groove worn down by years of me settling in to read the evening paper. I had laid those floors myself, board by board, while Eleanor directed me with the precision of a general. In the kitchen, my hand rested on the cool, smooth surface of the granite countertop. I remembered the day we picked out the slab, Eleanor running her fingers over the flecks of quartz, her eyes lighting up. "This is the one, Stan," she'd said. "It looks like a galaxy." So, I measured it 3 times and cut it once, just like my father taught me. It fit perfectly. My gaze drifted to the bay window in the living room, the one that caught the morning sun. It was her favorite spot. Sunlight poured through it now, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, golden sprites. I could still see her curled up on the window seat, a book in her lap, a mug of tea steaming beside her. The memory came so easily, so vividly. It was less a thought and more of a feeling that washed over me. The scent of sawdust, the grating sound of the handsaw, the weight of the hammer in my hand. She had stood in the yard, arms crossed, directing. "It needs more light. Stan." Her voice echoed in my memory, clear as a bell. "For my books and my flowers." So I built it for her. It took me 2 weekends and more than a little cursing. But when it was done, and she placed her first geranium on the sill, her smile made it all worth it. That was the currency this house was built on. Not dollars, but smiles and shared moments. The chime of the doorbell pulled me from my thoughts. I knew who it was. It was Tuesday, which meant it was Amelia and Mark's weekly check-in. I opened the door to see my daughter holding a brown paper bag and my son-in-law, Mark, looking at his phone. "Hey, Dad," Amelia said, giving me a quick, one-armed hug as she pushed past me into the kitchen. "Brought you some lasagna. Just heated up for dinner." "Thank you, honey," I said, closing the door. Mark grunted a "hello," his eyes still glued to the screen. He wore a watch that probably cost more than my first car. They moved through the house with an air of impatient familiarity. Mark sat in my armchair, scrolling, while Amelia put the foil-wrapped container in the fridge. She looked around the kitchen, her brow furrowed slightly. "You know, Dad, this faucet is still dripping. You should really get that fixed." "I'll get to it," I said. I had planned to, this weekend. And we really need to talk about getting someone to manage the yard. It's getting a little overgrown. They stayed for exactly 45 minutes. The duration of their visit measured not by conversation but by a kind of internal clock they seemed to share. They spoke of their upcoming trip to Phoenix, a business opportunity Mark was excited about. It was all very vague: investors, presentations, future plans. I nodded and listened, but I could feel the distance between us. A vast, empty space that polite conversation couldn't bridge. "Don't worry, Dad," Amelia said as they stood by the door, ready to leave. "We'll check in on you constantly." Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Have a safe trip," I said, and watched them walk to their sleek, dark blue SUV. I was clearing away their coffee mugs when the phone on the kitchen wall rang. I picked it up. It was Amelia. "Hey, Dad. Just wanted to say I love you again," she said, her voice sounding tinny and distant. Already in her car. "I love you too. Honey, drive safe." "Okay. Bye." I heard a click, but it was soft, not the definitive clunk of a disconnected line. I held the receiver for a moment, about to place it back in its cradle, when I heard her voice again, clearer, this time as if she were in the room. "Okay. He's off. Did you get the email from the realtor?" A cold stillness washed over me. My hand froze, holding the phone to my ear. I shouldn't listen. It felt wrong, but I couldn't move. Mark's voice came through, impatient. "Yeah. I got it. He sent the comps. Houses this size in this neighborhood are going for $950. Easy. Maybe more. He thinks we can get $970 if we move fast." My heart started to pound. A slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. Amelia's voice was lower. A conspiratorial whisper. $970,000. God. Mark. That would change everything. Then, a flicker of something hesitation. "Maybe. What about, what about Dad?" There was a sigh from Mark. It was a sound I knew well. The sound of an adult tired of dealing with a child. "Amelia, we've been over this. He's a burden. He can't manage this place on his own. You said it yourself. The dripping faucet. The yard, it's only going to get worse. This is what's best for him." A burden. The word landed like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. "Oak Ridge Gardens has a room available," Mark continued, his voice smooth and practiced. "It's a great facility. He'll be safe there. He'll have people his own age. We can visit every weekend." I leaned against the counter, the cool granite pressing into my back. The humming of the refrigerator suddenly sounded like a roar in my ears. I looked around the kitchen, at the galaxy in the countertop, at the worn wooden spoon Eleanor always used resting in a ceramic jar. Each object was a memory, a piece of our life. And to them, it was just a price tag, an obstacle. I stood there, a ghost in my own home, listening as my daughter and her husband planned the dismantling of my life. My future was a room in a facility. My home was their financial salvation. The conversation turned to logistics, to using the Phoenix trip as a cover to meet with investors who might be interested in the property. They talked about power of attorney, about how to present it to me as a favor, as a way to take the load off my shoulders. I don't know how long I stood there after the real click finally came, signaling the end of the call. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than before. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the oven door. I saw a man of 72, with gray hair and lines around his eyes. A widower. An old man. A bourdain. A wave of something hot and sharp surged through my chest, chasing away the cold shock. It wasn't just sadness. It was anger. A quiet, deep, and unfamiliar rage. My gaze drifted back to the wedding photo on the mantel. Eleanor's smiling face. She had loved this house. We had poured our youth, our sweat, our love into these walls. It was our legacy. It was my home. A series of small, seemingly innocent moments from the past few months clicked into place, like tumblers in a lock. Mark, leaning against the porch rail a few weeks ago, asking casually, "How's the market in this neighborhood holding up?" Amelia, sighing dramatically over the phone last month. "Ugh. The property taxes on this place are killer. Dad, I don't know how you manage it." They weren't stray comments. They were reconnaissance. They were laying the groundwork. The anger didn't make me want to scream or break things. It settled deep in my bones. A cold, hard certainty. I would not let them do this. I would not let them erase Eleanor's memory for a down payment on a new life. I would not be managed, handled, and discarded like a piece of old furniture. I walked with a steady, newfound purpose to the small office off the living room. I pulled open the second drawer of my old metal filing cabinet. The drawer groaned in protest. I thumbed past old tax returns and appliance warranties until my fingers found the thick folder labeled Deed. I pulled it out and laid it on the desk. The paper was thick. Important. I read the names printed in formal, looping script. Stanley Miller and Eleanor Miller. No, just Stanley Miller. It was mine. Unequivocally. Legally. Mina. I sat down in my creaky office chair. The document spread before me. My hands, which had been trembling just minutes before, were now perfectly still. I reached for the old leather-bound address book on my desk, a relic from a time before cell phones. I flipped through the stiff pages, past the names of friends who were long gone, until my finger landed on a name under the letter C. David Chen, attorney at law, real estate specialist. I stared at the name and number. I didn't pick up the phone. Not yet. But I knew, with a clarity that cut through all the pain and shock, exactly what I was going to do next. The architect in me, the part that plans and measures and builds, was waking up from a long, quiet sleep. They had made their plan. Now, it was time for me to make mine. My finger rested on the name for a long moment. The embossed letters of David Chen feeling like a tangible path forward. The house was deathly quiet around me, but my mind was a whirlwind of calculations and consequences. For 2 years since Eleanor's passing, I had lived in a fog of grief and routine. A passive observer of my own life. That fog had been burned away by the heat of betrayal. I picked up the phone. This time, my hand was steady. The next morning, I found myself in a leather chair that was far more modern and expensive than anything I owned. David Chen's office was on the 12th floor of a downtown skyscraper, a world of glass and steel that looked down on the city. It was clean, orderly, and impersonal, the complete opposite of my home. David himself was a man who matched his surroundings. He was sharp, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, and had a calm, reassuring demeanor that immediately put me at ease. I explained my situation, carefully omitting the emotional details. I was a widower, looking to downsize for my retirement. and I wanted to understand the process and ensure everything was handled cleanly. He listened patiently, nodding, his eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, he leaned forward, steepling his fingers on his polished mahogany desk. "Mr. Miller," he began, his voice even, "I've pulled the records for your property. You and your late wife were listed as joint tenants with rights of survivorship upon her passing. Sole ownership transferred to you. The title is clean. The property and everything in it is yours and yours alone." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Your daughter, Amelia, is she on the title? Is her name on the deed in any capacity?" "No," I said. "It was always just me and Eleanor." A small, professional smile touched his lips. "Then the situation is very simple." He leaned back in his chair. "Legally, Stanley, they don't have a leg to stand on. You can sell it to whomever you want, whenever you want. For whatever price you deem fair, you can gift it to charity. You could, if you were so inclined, tear it down and plant a rose garden. Your daughter has no legal claim whatsoever. The question isn't if you can act, but how fast." The clarity of it was like a bracing wind. My fears of a messy, protracted battle, of being dragged into a fight I didn't have the energy for, dissolved. I had the power. I had always had it, I'd just forgotten. Walking out of the high-rise building and back onto the bustling street, the city felt different. The roar of the traffic, the sea of anonymous faces, it no longer felt overwhelming. It felt like freedom. My decision solidified then, not as an act of revenge, but as an act of survival. This wasn't about hurting Amelia and Mark. It was about saving myself. It was about honoring Eleanor and the life we built by refusing to let its final chapter be written by someone else. They saw a burden and an asset. I was about to show them a man who was the sole, undisputed owner of his own life. My next stop was a small, bright real estate office a few blocks away. I had found her name online, recommended for her efficiency and discretion. Jessica Riley was a whirlwind of energy. With a sharp haircut and an even sharper gaze, she moved with a purpose that reminded me of a younger Eleanor. I explained my situation in the same carefully curated way I had with David. I needed to sell. I needed it done quickly. And I needed it done quietly. She listened intently, her pen poised over a notepad. She didn't ask prying questions. She seemed to understand that behind my simple request was a much larger story. "Discretion is my middle name. Stanley," she said, her voice warm, but all business. "We can arrange for a photographer this week. We'll prepare all the marketing materials in advance. The moment you give me the green light, we can have the listing live within the hour. Tell me your timeline." We sat together at a small table. A calendar spread between us. My architect's mind took over, seeing the project not in emotional terms, but as a series of logistical steps. Amelia and Mark were leaving for Phoenix in 5 days. On a Sunday morning, they'd be gone for 10 days. The "for sale" sign cannot go up until Sunday afternoon. I stated, my voice firm. After they've left for the airport, the first showings can begin Monday morning. Jessica's eyebrows rose slightly, but she just nodded and made a note. A concentrated push. "I like it. We'll schedule a 2-day blitz of showings. Back-to-back appointments. It creates a sense of urgency. We can call for best and final offers by Wednesday." The plan was audacious. It was precise. It felt right. That afternoon, As Jessica was leaving my house after a preliminary walkthrough, Mrs. Gable from next door was retrieving her mail. She'd lived there for 30 years and had a radar for any deviation from the neighborhood norm. She waved, her eyes fixed on the professionally dressed woman closing a briefcase by my front walk. "Everything all right?" "Stanley," she called out, her voice laced with a cheerful curiosity that was her signature. My heart gave a little jump, but I forced a calm smile. This was the first test. "Everything's fine. Carol, just exploring my options for the future. You know, planning ahead." It was a vague but plausible answer. She nodded, satisfied for the moment, and retreated into her house. I had passed. I felt a small, grim satisfaction. I was learning. The rest of the week was a quiet agony of anticipation. I went through the motions, tending to my garden, reading the paper. But all the while, the plan was humming just beneath the surface. Then came Saturday evening, the night before their flight. They came over for one last dinner, bringing a store-bought pizza. It was their final performance of being the caring, dutiful children. The air was thick with things unsaid. Every word they spoke was layered with a grotesque irony that only I could understand. "Are you sure you'll be okay here by yourself for 10 days? Dad," Amelia asked, her face a mask of concern. "I'll be fine. Honey, I've managed this long." Mark chimed in, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "We'll set up a grocery delivery for you midweek, just in case. And we'll call every day." "That's very thoughtful," I said, my voice neutral. I looked at him, at his self-satisfied expression, his expensive watch gleaming under the dining room light. He was looking at his future, and it was sitting right in front of him. As they got up to leave, Amelia gave me another one of her brief, hollow hugs. "We'll miss you. Dad, please take care of yourself." I met her eyes over her shoulder and saw nothing but the reflection of my own tired face. "You have no idea," I thought. The next morning, I watched from the bay window as they loaded their suitcases into their SUV. They waved. I waved back. The engine started, and the car pulled away from the curb, turned the corner, and disappeared. The house was finally, truly quiet. I took a deep breath, walked to the kitchen, and picked up the phone. "Jessica," I said, "they're gone. Let's begin." Less than an hour later, I heard a quiet thud from the front yard. I looked out the window. A man was hammering a sign into my lawn, red and white and stark against the green grass. "For sale?" It was real now. The next few days were a blur. My phone, which was usually silent for hours at a time, began to ring constantly. It was always Jessica. "Stanley, we have a dozen showings scheduled for tomorrow. The online listing has over 5,000 views already. People are loving the custom woodwork in the study. Multiple parties have asked for disclosure documents." I felt like a spectator at my own life's auction. I would leave the house in the morning and return in the evening to find everything subtly different, a chair slightly out of place, the faint scent of a stranger's perfume in the air. The house was no longer just my home, it was a property, an asset being appraised by strangers. It was exactly what Amelia and Mark wanted, but it was happening on my terms. Then, on Wednesday afternoon, just 3 days after the sign went up, Jessica called. Her voice was different. It was electric. "Stanley," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Are you sitting down?" "I am now," I said. lowering myself into my armchair. "We have an offer. An investment group out of California. They saw the virtual tour. Sent a local agent this morning. And they want it. They're waiving all contingencies." My mouth went dry. "What's the offer?" Jessica took a dramatic pause. "Full asking price. $970,000. Cash. They can close in 10 days. The number hung in the air. Vast and unimaginable. 10 days. They wouldn't even be back from Phoenix yet. Everything was moving faster. Bigger than I had ever dared to plan. This was it. The point of no return. I looked around the living room. At the mantelpiece with Eleanor's picture. At the sun streaming through the bay window she had designed. For a fleeting second, a wave of doubt washed over me. This was her house. Our house. But the memory of that phone call. The cold, clinical dismissal in my daughter's voice. The single, brutal word, burden surged back, erasing all hesitation. This wasn't her house anymore. It was just wood and nails and memories. And I had to protect the memories from those who would sell them for cash. My voice, when I finally spoke, was quiet. But it didn't waver. "Accept the offer." The word accept left my lips and hung in the quiet air of the study. There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. Then Jessica's professional energy kicked back in. "Excellent. Stanley, I'll send over the initial paperwork electronically. We'll need to move fast to meet the 10-day closing." And move fast, we did. The next week was a whirlwind of structured, relentless activity. I spent an afternoon in David Chen's glass-walled office, signing my name over and over again. My signature, once a tool for approving blueprints and building plans, was now a tool for dismantling a life and building a new one. I signed the purchase and sale agreement. I signed the disclosure forms. I signed the title transfer documents. With each stroke of the pen, I felt not a sense of loss, but a sense of power being reclaimed. My hand didn't shake. My resolve didn't waver. I was an architect again. And this was the most important project of my life. While the legal machinery churned in the background, I executed my own plans. On a bright Thursday morning, I walked into a branch of Midwest Federal Trust, a solid, old-fashioned bank with a granite facade and tellers who knew their customers by name. It was a place Amelia and Mark had never heard of. I sat down with a kind, efficient woman named Mrs. Peterson and opened a new checking account, a savings account, and a safety deposit box. I established my fortress, brick by financial brick. There would be no joint ownership, no shared access. This was mine. My next task was the most difficult, but emotionally. I had to find a new place to live. The name Mark had mentioned, Oak Ridge Gardens, left a bitter taste in my mouth. That was their choice for me. A place to be stored. My choice would be different. I had researched communities for active seniors. Places that focused on independence, not infirmity. I made an appointment at a place called The Willows. It was nothing like the grim institution I'd pictured. The Willows was a collection of handsome brick buildings set among manicured lawns and old oak trees. There were walking paths, a library, a small cinema, and a dining hall that looked more like a pleasant restaurant. It wasn't a place where you went to wait for the end. It was a place where you went to live. I was shown a one-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor. It was smaller than my house, of course, but it was bright and airy, with a large window that overlooked a grove of birch trees and a small balcony perfect for a chair and a few of Eleanor's potted geraniums. It was a blank slate, It was perfect. I signed the lease that same day. That evening, the phone rang. The caller ID showed Amelia's name, with a little palm tree icon next to it. Phoenix. My heart gave a sharp, hard thump against my ribs. This was the real test. I took a breath and answered, pitching my voice to sound exactly as it always did. Hello. Hey. Dad, how are you doing? Her voice was cheerful, a little too loud, with the sound of chatter and clinking glasses in the background. I'm doing just fine. Honey, sounds like you're having fun. Oh, it's been great. The weather is amazing. Mark's meetings are going so well. We just wanted to call and check in. Are you eating okay? Did the groceries we ordered arrive? They did. Thank you. I had lasagna last night. The lasagna she had brought over. The one that sat in my fridge like a Trojan horse. Good. Good. Well, we just wanted to say hi. We'll be home in a few days. Can't wait to see you. You too. Honey, have a good time. I hung up the phone and stood in the silence of the kitchen. My hands were clenched into fists at my sides. I had done it. I had lied to my own daughter with a calm, steady voice, and I felt nothing but a cold weight, grim sense of victory. The next phase was packing. I started in the attic, with the boxes of memories I hadn't touched in years. I was methodical. I created 3 piles, one to keep, one to donate, and one to discard. The keep pile was small and precious. I packed Eleanor's favorite books, the box of photos from our wedding, the hand-knitted blanket she'd made for Amelia as a baby. Each item was a tangible piece of our love, and I wrapped them carefully in tissue paper as if they were priceless artifacts. Then, I moved on to their things. Amelia had left half her life in her childhood bedroom, and Mark had slowly colonized the guest room with his golf clubs, old electronics, and boxes of financial documents. For this, I did not pack myself. I hired a moving company. 2 strong, efficient young men arrived on Saturday morning. They worked with a detached professionalism, wrapping and boxing everything with speed. There was no sentiment here. It was just a job. I directed them to label every box clearly, Amelia, Mark. I watched as they carried out the life they had left behind, box by box, until the rooms were empty and echoing. I had rented a 10 by 15-foot storage unit under my name. I drove behind the moving truck and watched as they filled it. The door rolled down with a deafening clang, and I snapped a padlock on it. I had paid for the first 3 months in advance. As I was driving away, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. My stomach tightened. Hello. Is this Mr. Stanley Miller? A man's voice asked. It is. Hi. This is Ron from Secure Space Storage. We just had a bit of a mix-up on the paperwork for your unit. The address you listed for correspondence, is it a new address? It's not matching what we have in the system for your driver's license. My heart hammered. Ah, stupid mistake. I had put down the address for the Willows, not the house. For a second, I imagined the whole plan unraveling over a clerical error. I pulled the car over to the side of the road. Yes, that's correct, I said, forcing my voice to remain calm. I'm in the process of moving. The address on my license is my old one. The one on the form is the new one. Is that a problem? Oh, no. No problem at all. Sire, Ron said cheerfully. Just needed to verify for our records. All set now. Have a great day. He hung up. I sat in the car for a full minute. my breath coming in ragged bursts. It was a small thing, a tiny, unforeseen complication, but it was a reminder of how easily the best-laid plans could go awry. The closing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. The day before they were due to fly home, I met Jessica at the title company. The final documents were signed. The keys were handed over to a representative for the new owners. It was done. That afternoon, I received an email from Midwest Federal Trust. I opened it, and my breath caught in my throat. Subject: credit to your account. The body of the email was simple. It was a number. 970美元. Ling. Ling. I stared at it. At the zeros and the commas. It wasn't just money. It was security. It was independence. It was the sound of a door slamming shut on the past and another one opening to the future. That evening, I undertook the final step. A locksmith came and changed every lock on the house, including the deadbolts, the old keys, including the one I knew Amelia kept on her keychain, were now useless pieces of metal. Then, I installed the new doorbell myself. It was a sleek, modern device with a high-definition camera and a motion sensor. I connected it to the Wi-Fi and downloaded the app to my phone. I tested it, watching a live feed of my own front porch on the small screen. My last act in the house was to write a letter. I didn't write it in anger. I wrote it with the cold precision of an architect drafting a final report. I took a single sheet of my best stationery, the thick, cream-colored paper Eleanor had loved, and I wrote, "Dear Amelia and Mark, since you considered this house an asset and me a burden, I have taken the logical step of liquidating the asset and relieving you of the burden. The house has been sold. The proceeds are mine, secured in an account you will not be able to access. Your personal belongings have been moved to the secure space storage facility on Route 9, Unit 34B. The first 3 months have been paid for. The key is in this envelope. This is not a negotiation. It is a notification. I wish you the best in the future you have planned. Stanley." I folded the letter, slid it into an envelope along with the small, brass key to the storage unit, and placed it squarely in the center of the granite countertop, the galaxy Eleanor had loved. Then, I picked up my single suitcase, my briefcase with my important papers, and the framed wedding photo from the mantelpiece. I walked through the empty, echoing rooms one last time, not with sadness, but with a sense of finality. I stepped out the front door and locked it behind me. The click of the new deadbolt was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I didn't look back. I drove to the Willows, unpacked my few belongings in my new, bright apartment, and placed Eleanor's picture on the nightstand. I sat in a comfortable armchair, looking out the window as the sun set behind the birch trees. For the first time in 2 years, I felt a sense of peace. An hour later, as darkness settled over the city, my phone buzzed on the table beside me. I picked it up. It was a notification from the doorbell app. A small banner across the top of the screen. It showed a thumbnail image of my old front porch, illuminated by the porch light. And on the screen, 2 words that made my heart beat a little faster. "Motion detected at your front door." My thumb hovered over the notification, a small portal to a life I had just surgically removed myself from. For a breath, the world seemed to shrink to that single, glowing rectangle. A tremor, the first I'd felt in weeks, ran through my hand. It wasn't fear. It was the vibration of a massive engine finally shuddering to a halt. This was the culmination of everything, every quiet, Agonizing hour of planning. Every document signed with a steady hand. Every hollow conversation over the phone. With a slow, deliberate movement, I tapped the screen. The app opened, projecting the live feed from my old front porch onto my phone. The image was unnervingly clear, rendered in the cool, hyper-real tones of the dusk to dawn sensor. And there they were, standing in the center of the frame like actors on a stage. Amelia, her hair slightly mussed from the flight, was rummaging through her purse with frantic energy. Mark stood behind her, his expensive suit now rumpled, his tie loosened. He had one hand on his rolling suitcase and the other tapping an impatient rhythm on his thigh. They were surrounded by their luggage, small islands of entitlement on a shore that was no longer theirs. I watched as Amelia finally produced her keychain and slid the familiar brass key into the new lock. I knew that key. I had held it in my hand 1,000 times. Now, it was a ghost. I saw the familiar, thoughtless motion of her wrist as she tried to turn it. It met solid resistance. She frowned, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face, and tried again, putting more of her weight into it. The key refused to turn. "What the hell?" she muttered, the sound coming through my phone's speaker as a tinny. "Distant complet? The key's stuck or something." "It's not stuck. You're not doing it right." Mark snapped, his voice tight with the accumulated stress of travel. "Jiggle it. You always have to jiggle that stupid lock." "I am jiggling it," she shot back, her voice rising. She forced the key back and forth with a grating, metallic scrape that I could hear clearly. It was no use. The high-quality, anti-pick deadbolt I had chosen held firm. A silent, unyielding guardian. Her annoyance curdled into confusion. She pulled the key out and stared at it, as if it had personally offended her. Mark let out a long, theatrical sigh and shouldered her aside. "Honestly, sometimes I wonder how you get through the day." "Let me do it." He snatched the keys from her hand and, with an air of masculine superiority, jammed the key back into the lock. He twisted. Nothing. He put his shoulder against the solid oak door I had hung with Eleanor 30 years ago and pushed. The door didn't budge. The frame didn't creak. It was as if he were pushing against a rock face. His confidence evaporated, replaced by a baffled rage. "What is this? Did you call him?" he demanded, turning on Amelia. "Did you tell him we were coming home a day early? Is this some kind of senile joke?" "No, I wanted to surprise him. I thought he'd be happy." Amelia's voice was climbing in pitch, teetering on the edge of hysteria. "What is going on? Why would he change the locks? He can't even change a light bulb by himself." The sheer arrogance of that statement struck me. They had built their entire plan on the foundation of my incompetence. I watched, my face impassive, a silent, invisible observer from my new life, watching the last act of my old one. Mark, abandoning all pretense of civility, started pounding on the door, his fist making loud, hollow booms that echoed in the quiet suburban street. "Dad, Dad, are you in there? It's us. Open the door." He pounded until his knuckles must have been raw. He shouted until his voice was hoarse. There was, of course, no answer, but the echo of his own desperation. Defeated, he finally stopped, leaning against the doorframe and breathing heavily. It was then that Amelia's gaze drifted to the mailbox. I saw her eyes focus on it, as if noticing it for the first time. She walked towards it slowly, a sense of dread seeming to slow her movements. She opened the small metal flap with a hesitant creak. She reached inside, and her fingers brushed against the thick, cream-colored paper of the envelope. She pulled it out. She stood there for a long moment, just staring at the envelope, at her name and Mark's written in my familiar, architectural script. With trembling fingers, she tore it open. My vantage point was perfect. I could see her eyes scanning the page, moving quickly from left to right. I watched the color drain from her face. I saw her pupils dilate in shock. I saw the exact moment the words ceased to be ink on a page and became her new reality. Her body went slack, as if her bones had suddenly dissolved. The letter fluttered from one hand, and the phone she was holding in the other slipped from her grasp, clattering onto the stone porch with a sharp, plastic crack. Mark whipped his head around. "What is it? What does that letter say?" She couldn't speak. She just stood there, her mouth slightly agape, her gaze fixed on some distant point of horror. He strode over, snatched the letter from the ground, and read it himself. His reaction was not one of shock, but of pure, undiluted rage. His face contorted, turning a dark, mottled red. A strangled, guttural sound, something between a roar and a sob, tore from his throat. "He sold it," he screamed. The sound so loud, it distorted the phone's tiny speaker. He spun to face Amelia, his face a mask of fury. The old bastard actually sold it. The carefully constructed illusion of their partnership, their united front, shattered into a million pieces right there on my old front porch. "You!" Mark shrieked, his finger jabbing at the air inches from Amelia's face. "This is all your fault, your weakness. I told you we should have gotten power of attorney 6 months ago. I told you he wasn't as helpless as you thought." Amelia, shocked out of her stupor by his attack, found her voice, and it was a voice I had never heard before. Stripped of all its sweetness, filled with the venom of a long simmering resentment. My fault, don't you dare put this on me. Mark, you were the one with the spreadsheets and the market analyses. You were the one whispering in my ear every single night. It's our future. Amelia, it's our only way out. Because we needed it, he yelled back, his voice cracking. Oh. And why is that? Mark, she taunted, her words dripping with sarcasm. Because that big Phoenix investment opportunity was such a sure thing. All that talk about meetings and investors, it was all a lie. Wasn't it? Just like everything else, there is no future. Because you don't even have a job. The words hung in the cold night air. A stunning, brutal indictment. Mark flinched as if he'd been physically struck. The rage drained from his face, replaced by a pale, sickly pallor. What? What did you just say? He stammered, his bravado gone. You heard me. Amelia was openly sobbing now. But her voice was hard, merciless. I know. Mark, I've known for months. Your consulting work, your late nights closing a deal. It was all garbage. I saw the termination letter from your company stuffed in the back of your closet 6 months ago. You've been lying to me. You've been lying to everyone. He just stood there, exposed and broken under the soft glow of the porch light. The confident, successful son-in-law, the man who was going to secure their future, was gone. In his place stood a desperate, unemployed man who had gambled everything on a daughter betraying her father. And he had lost. Their entire scheme, I realized then, wasn't just born of greed. It was born of desperation. A frantic, pathetic attempt to prop up a life built on a foundation of lies. They stood on the porch of a stranger's house. Two people, bound not by love, but by a shared, failed conspiracy. The show was over. I watched them for a moment longer as they descended into bitter, whispered accusations, their worlds collapsing in on them. I felt no joy. I felt no thrill of victory. I felt only a profound and necessary emptiness. This was not a celebration, it was an amputation. I had cut away the diseased part of my life to save the rest. With a final, decisive movement, I swiped the app closed. The screen went dark, and they were gone. I stood up from my chair and walked to the small, immaculate kitchenette in my new apartment. I opened a cabinet and took out a bottle of Bordeaux, a 2005 vintage I'd been saving. It was Eleanor's favorite. My hands were perfectly steady as I peeled the foil and twisted the corkscrew. The soft pop of the cork was the only sound in the room. I poured a single glass, watching the dark, ruby red wine swirl against the crystal. I carried the glass back to the living area and stopped in front of the nightstand where I had placed our wedding photo. I looked at Eleanor's smile, at the light in her eyes that I had tried so hard to keep alive in my memory. I raised my glass to her. "We're free." "Eleanor," I whispered, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite name. It was grief and relief and a deep, aching love, all swirled together. I protected our home. I protected our memory. I took a slow sip. The wine was rich and smooth, full of complexity. It tasted of the earth, of time, of a life well lived. I walked out onto my small balcony. The night air was cool and clean, carrying the distant, humming pulse of the city. Below me, the lights twinkled. A vast, man-made galaxy. I was alone, but for the first time in 2 years, I was not lonely. The weight I had been carrying, the quiet, corrosive identity of being a burden, had been lifted. I was the architect of my own life once more, and the view from my new foundation was limitless. The number in my bank account wasn't a prize, it was a set of blueprints, a toolbox, the raw material for building whatever came next. A thought, quiet and clear, surfaced in my mind, as if it had been waiting patiently for this exact moment of peace. Italy. Eleanor had a book filled with pictures of Tuscany rolling hills, cypress trees, ancient stone villas. We had always planned to go. Someday. My someday had finally arrived. I would go. I would drink wine under the Tuscan sun and walk through the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. I would see it all. For both of us. I took another sip of wine, leaning against the railing and letting the profound quiet of the evening settle into my bones. I had lost a daughter. Or rather, I had finally acknowledged a loss that had occurred long ago. But in doing so, I had found something I thought was gone forever myself. The final chapter of my life was not going to be a short, sad postscript written by others in a place I did not choose. It was going to be a grand tour, a new design, a story of my own making. And it was just beginning.